If something happens to you which is wrong, the best thing to do is have it corrected the best way you can. The best thing for me was to go to the Supreme Court. Miss Irene Amos Morgan. Miss Irene was born in 1917. That's about 2 years before my grandfather was born. She's from Baltimore, Maryland. During World War II, she worked for a defense contractor, Glenn L. Martin, and she worked on the production line for the B-26 Marauders. I assume that's a plane. Okay. At 68, she earned her bachelor's degree, and at 73, she earned her master's degree in urban studies. Just a little backstory on Miss Irene, yes. And now a little backstory on Greyhound buses during this period of time. So the Greyhound buses, unlike the city buses, they did not have a white section and a colored section. Instead, the law was that a black person could not sit next to or across from a white person. Okay? The similarities between city buses and the Greyhound bus is that if there's no room on the bus and a white person ends up standing, then the black people have to give up their seats. Okay? Setting the scene. Now, July 16th, 1944, Miss Irene, after having suffered a miscarriage, decided that she was going to go home to her mother. She wanted to recuperate mentally and physically. Okay? So she boards the Greyhound bus in Virginia. She is not too full, it's not too empty. And despite the fact that there's not a colored section on the bus, she still sits to the back. She's about 3 rows away from the back of the bus. Now, stop after stop after stop, they pick up more and more people to the point where when a white couple gets on the bus, they are left standing. And you know what that means. The bus driver goes back and tells Miss Irene, and there was another black woman with her, tells both of them to give up their seats. The other woman gives up her seat. Irene said, "You got the right one today." She told him, "No." She said, "I paid my money. I'm not getting up." So the bus driver promptly grabs a sheriff who tried to pull a fast one over Miss Irene, presents her with an arrest warrant, and even Miss Irene said, "That can't be real. You don't even know my name to have an arrest warrant filled out." So she takes the piece of paper that was supposed to be an arrest warrant, tears it up, and throws it out the window. That's when the sheriff decided he was going to physically remove her from the bus. Why is every cop in all of these stories putting hands on black women to remove them from anywhere? Miss Irene said, "He touched me, and that's when I kicked him in a very bad place. He hobbled off, and another one came on. Now, I was going to bite him, but he looked dirty, so I clawed him instead. I ripped at his shirt. We were both pulling at each other, and then he said that he would use his nightstick. I said, 'Well, we'll whip each other then.' Let me tell you what. Considering the place and the time, the South, before the Civil Rights Act of 64 and the Voting Rights Act of 65, okay? A black woman on a bus after being told to remove herself from her seat, fights the sheriff, both of them, and threatens to beat one sheriff's tail if he tried to whip her with a nightstick. And that is badass to me, okay? Her story was my favorite. All of them resisted in their own ways. But Miss Irene, she spoke to me. She spoke to me. She was arrested. Yep, of course she was arrested. She was charged with resisting arrest and violating Virginia's Jim Crow transit laws. She spent 8 hours in the county jail before her mother showed up with $100 cash to cover her bail. Yeah. She, of course, was convicted. She had admitted to resisting arrest, so she was convicted, and she agreed to pay, the $100. She did not plead guilty to breaking the segregation laws. She said, no, I'm not pleading guilty to an unjust law. They convicted her anyways, and they ordered her to pay $10 in fines. She said no to that too. I'm sorry, I just love her. I just love her so much. Anyways, she said no, she wasn't paying that. Absolutely not. With the help of the NAACP, using their legal defense, she began to appeal the conviction. She managed to appeal it all the way up to the United States Supreme Court. Now, the United States Supreme Court agreed to hear her case, and in a landmark decision, an unprecedented ruling, they said that Virginia's segregation transit laws were unconstitutional. And they then extended this ruling to bus terminals used in interstate bus services. So not just the buses, but the terminals too. Yeah. Despite this, Black people were still getting removed and arrested whenever they tried to integrate these facilities, whenever they tried to integrate the bus terminals and the buses themselves. And that's because the southern states refused to acknowledge the ruling of Morgan versus Virginia. That was the name of the case. Okay? They absolutely refused, Virginia included. And the case was against them. And her case inspired the 1947 Journey of Reconciliation. Okay? The Journey of Reconciliation was really 16 activists from the Chicago-based Congress of Racial Equity. They rode on the interstate buses through the Upper South to test the enforcement of the Supreme Court ruling. So the 16 activists, they divided themselves between two interstate bus lines, Greyhound and Trailways. They usually placed an interracial pair in the white area of the bus, and then the other activists would, sit throughout the bus disguised as ordinary passengers. And they had some that sat in the racial sections reserved for them by segregation laws. Okay? Meaning they had Black folks sitting in the back of the bus. Okay? Now the group traveled throughout the North uneventfully until they hit North Carolina. Yeah. When they hit North Carolina, they encountered arrests and violence. Now, by the end of the journey, the protesters had conducted over 24 tests. They endured 12 arrests and dangerous mob violence. Okay? Now, North Carolina in particular, in flagrant violation of the Morgan decision, North Carolina police arrested a civil rights activist. His name is Bayard Rustin. Some of you may know him, some of you may not. Okay? But they arrested him. He went on trial and they convicted him of a crime that was not a crime. Yeah. And you heard me right. They convicted him of a crime that was not a crime. And then they sentenced him to 22 days on a chain gang for violating the segregation laws, despite the fact that he was riding on an interstate bus. And we know the ruling. The Supreme Court ruling said segregation is unconstitutional on interstate buses. These aren't city buses. These are interstate buses. You know, when they talk about Miss Irene, everything I read referred to her as feisty. They called her a feisty black woman, which at first I took offense to, because y'all know how I am. Y'all know how I am. But in reading, her story, I can see where they came to that conclusion. But then I asked myself, I said, self, was she feisty or was she fed up? Was she feisty or was she over it? Was she feisty or was she tired? We know that she was tired mentally and she was tired physically, but was she just tired of living in a country that her ancestors built? Was she tired of being seen as and considered inferior to white people? Was she just tired?